Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Living in the Liner Notes. I'm your host, Enrique Bocanegra, and today we'll be discussing an album that has become a seminal piece in the world of lo-fi music and indie rock. This album, with its unique sonic textures, hard-on-sleeve style of songwriting, and evocative lyricism, has captured the hearts of listeners for years and has inspired countless artists. That album being The Glow Part 2 by The Microphones. The Glow Part 2 was released on September 11th, 2001. And was the third studio album by The Microphones, which is a solo project by musician Phil Elverum. Elverum recorded and produced the album on his own in the Dub Narcotics studio in Olympia, Washington, where he was living at the time. Despite many artists at the time having already switched to digital recording, The Glow Part 2 was recorded entirely onto 16-track analog tape, and as a result, the album has a much warmer and distinct sound to it. Elverum also used unique recording techniques to get the sounds he wanted, and also took advantage of the full stereo spectrum while mixing, which gives the album a completely different experience when listening to it on headphones. The album centers on themes like nature, life and death, and most importantly, heartbreak, due to the fact that at the time of recording, Elverum had recently broken up with his then girlfriend. The album's title is actually a reference to a track called The Glow that was featured on The Microphones' previous album, It Was Hot, We Stayed in the Water. Elverum has stated that the idea of the glow is similar to one's inner life force. While the initial track is about finding the glow and letting its warmth lift you up, this album is about what happens when that same glow leaves your life. The album opens with the track I Want Wind to Blow. The track opens with Elverum plucking an amber little melody on his guitar and sings the line, "The thunderclouds broke up." Within the first few moments of the album, we're already treated to a multifaceted metaphor about the current state of Elverum's life and also works as sort of a main idea for the album. In reality, the Thunderclouds were a Beach Boys cover band that Elverum was in with a few friends and his girlfriend at the time, but once their relationship ended, so too did the band. His relationship with her was the aforementioned storm, and now that it's cleared, he's left to pick up the pieces. Elverum has stated that the song's title refers to wanting something exciting to happen to him. Throughout the song, he laments about the sights and sounds around him and how they only bring him further into this pit of depression that he's found himself in. He's tired of the way things currently are and wants something new. He wants wind to blow everything away and take him somewhere else. As the song continues, the guitars and other elements begin to slowly fade out until all that's left is a steady drum beat. The beat slowly marches on until everything comes back at once in this insane explosion of sound. It's an incredibly raw and cathartic moment on the album. It's heightened by the slightly distorted drums and cymbal crashes that play during this section. Distortion like this is usually avoided by artists and recording engineers, but here, Elverum purposely creates this distortion by increasing the input volume on his drum kit's microphones and compressing the recorded sound to give it that raw edge. This unpolished style of recording carries over into the next song, as the listeners met with the album's title track, The Glow Part 2. This track starts off with an extremely aggressive and in-your-face opening, a complete departure from what was heard in the first track. There's a noticeable pain in Elverum's voice, and a lot of the lyrics present here deal with Elverum's feelings of frustration and desolation in the aftermath of his breakup. Elverum is upset at the fact that despite all the anguish he's experienced, he's stuck holding on to these feelings. It's a bleak outlook, but after everything that has happened, he just wants to disappear. But I do think his sentiments here are relatable. The third track, The Moon, keeps up with the intensity of track 2, and deals more with how Elverum is dealing with his breakup. In this song, he sings about going for a late night walk and visiting places he used to go with his girlfriend, although this time, he's alone. He's hoping to get rid of those past memories and start with a clean slate. The production of this song is very interesting because even though the instrumentals are fast and filled with guitar and horns, Elverum's vocals are delivered very softly, in a very stream-of-conscious type of way. It makes it kind of hard to hear what he's actually saying, but I feel like this was definitely an intentional choice, most likely done as a way to match the frantic energy of the song. In the latter half of the song, he recalls different memories and realizes that the moon is a central figure in all of them. He decides to go out and stare down at the moon as a way to forget these memories, but he realizes it's a fruitless effort. The moon instead stares back at him, and he feels no relief. The song ends with this ominous sound that almost sounds like a distant foghorn. The foghorn-like sounds continue into the next track, Headless Horseman, and we're treated to a much more subdued performance by Elverum, a large departure from the larger sounds that was heard in the previous tracks. For this one, it's just Elverum and his guitar. In this song, we get a lot more direct references to a breakup, like going back and getting your things from someone's house. But we get some abstract imagery as well. He alludes to the idea that the breakup changed him and that he feels no longer human. On one hand, he can feel like a monster, a headless horseman. But on the other, he can feel like a weak and defenseless animal, a stray dog. While the first few tracks of this album focus on Elverum's frustration, all that has gone away, and now he's entering a deeper state of depression. Skipping ahead a bit, we have the track Instrumental, which is a short piece that uses some really interesting mixing techniques to take full advantage of the album being in stereo. The song starts off with some guitar picking, then alternates in the left and right channels, in a sort of call and response sort of way. It makes for a really beautiful sound and a very unique listening experience. Elverum has gone on record saying that he loves making use of the full stereo spectrum, and this is a great example of that. Along with guitar, the song features some hauntingly beautiful piano. Despite being an instrumental, it's one of my favorite songs on the album. A bit later, we get two more instrumental tracks that are only referred to as Something in the album's track list. They're ominous and more ambient-styled instrumentals that signal the end of the album's first half. Something 1 is very sparse and features the same foghorn sound from before. It almost sounds like it's slowly approaching from off in the distance. Something 2, however, is a lot more abrasive and rough, with a lot of harsher sounds that slowly take over the stereo field. These tracks really show Elverum's talent for making these incredible soundscapes. They also thematically fit the tone of the album really well, and do a great job of giving off the feeling of being covered in a shroud of darkness. We get a lot of great tracks as we head into the second half of the album. Many of these tracks dealing with Elverum self-reflecting on himself and what he experienced with his breakup. The track I Want to Be Cold is very heart-rending and is similar to the opening track I Want Wind to Blow. But instead of talking about wanting things to change, the song focuses on Elverum wanting to wallow in his sadness. The titular glow can provide warmth and comfort, but he doesn't want any of that. He wants the rain, the cold and soggy ground, to be buried in the snow. He wishes for death because he feels it's the only thing that can free him. The following track is a short one, but tells a story that seems to have taken place toward the tail end of Elverum's relationship. He describes how someone tore a hole in him that cut deep and leaked torrentially. Based on context, it seems that he and his girlfriend had gotten into an argument, and whatever was said really cut deep. After the dust from the fight is settled and his wound is healed, the only thing he feels from his relationship is boredom. After the dust from the fight has settled and his wound is healed, the only thing he feels from his relationship is boredom. It seems the feeling is mutual, because the song ends with a foreboding line, "Now we both know what we have to do."
Now we both know what we have to do.
Track 18 is I Felt Your Shape. It is a much more sincere and sentimental song that is about the idea of hugging someone. Elverum states that this song is about hugging someone in an empathetic manner instead of a possessive one. His way of describing this is really sweet and touching. and he talks about how this simple act can make you feel like you really understand a person. He describes a very home-like scene of hugging someone in the kitchen on their birthday and being able to feel every part of them, physically and spiritually. He mentions things like feeling their winter snows, their gusty blows, and lava flows.
I felt your fall, your winter snows, your gusty blow, your lava flow. I felt it all, your starry night, your lack of light, with limp arms.
It's a bit abstract, but you can still kind of tell what he means, this idea of feeling all aspects of a person. The sweetness doesn't last long, though, as he remembers his relationship that has just ended. It feels like this feeling is brand new to him, even though he could have sworn he'd felt it before. He's brought back to the cold night he's been in during the course of the album, and now he's left to wonder if he's actually always been alone this whole time. With things starting to get bleak, we're met with the track I Felt My Sides, and it surprisingly offers some hope by taking the idea that everyone is small and insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe and turning it into a positive thing. The song opens with Elverum singing about the dark place he has found himself, with only a small fire to keep himself just partially warm throughout the long night. But then, in an emotional explosion, the music becomes frantic and full of energy to symbolize the sun coming up, and Elverum feeling the warmth all throughout his body. As he's basking in the glow of the sun, he sees a freeway nearby and sees dozens of people driving by. It finally dawns on him that he's just one little person in a sea of billions of people, and that his problems aren't actually that big of a deal. He feels a sense of release from his newfound smallness. It's a strange, yet really uplifting message, and it's because of that it's another one of my favorite songs from the album. Things don't stay hopeful for long, however, as anger and rage engulf Elverum's world again. The song Samurai Sword is a song that's loud and aggressive. We're once again treated to the same distorted guitar and drums that we heard earlier in the album. There's plenty of clear metal influence here. After the extended instrumental intro, we hear Elverum whisper singing about how he's out in the wilderness and plotting to hunt down a polar bear with only a samurai sword. The polar bear could easily represent a multitude of things that he's talked about on the album already, but it doesn't matter who or what it represents. Elverum just wants it gone. For the final track, Elverum is once again in darkness and alone, presumably after letting his anger get the best of him in the previous track. He sings how the sun has gone down and the power is still out, so it seems the darkness won't be going away for a while. Despite all this, he mentions that his blood is still warm. Despite everything, he's still alive. Whether or not this is meant to be positive or not, I think is up to interpretation. However, I think it's a poignant note to end on. The idea that no matter what hardships we go through, we'll still come out alive in the end. Breakups can be a hard thing, and we may feel like a piece of ourselves is missing, but we're still alive, and every day is another day closer to feeling whole again. This part of the song only lasts about a minute and a half, and for the next 8 minutes, we hear that far-off foghorn again. But in the last few seconds of the album, we hear something that resembles a heartbeat. It's a strange way to end the record, but I think it's fitting and works as a great way to let the listener stop for a moment and take in everything they've heard on this hour-long journey. For the type of album this is and what it's trying to say, I think you couldn't end it any other way. The Glow Part 2 was well received during its time of release, and got a lot of buzz and attention from the indie community at the time. Music publication Pitchfork even gave it the award of Best Album of 2001, which is a pretty high honor considering all the other music that came out that year. As time has gone on, its adoration from music listeners has only grown, with many people calling it a masterpiece and some of Phil Elverum's best work. Music discussion online has also renewed interest in the album and has introduced it to many newer music listeners. Online review site and forum rateyourmusic.com has The Glow Part 2 ranked at number 40 on the site's overall ranking charts. Despite its lo-fi style, it's aged incredibly well and will most likely be a topic of discussion for years to come. As for Phil Elverum, he kept releasing music under the Microphones name until 2003, when he started to go by the name Mount Eerie, which funnily enough was the name of the last album he did as the Microphones. However, back in 2020, he brought back the Microphones name to release the aptly titled Microphones in 2020. All of the work he's released, whether it's under the Microphones or Mount Eerie, has really left a mark on the world of indie rock and independent music in general, with many artists labeling him as an inspiration to them. He's one of the most unique creators in the world of music today, and is quite the expansive library that one could explore and get lost in. Throughout the years, he's even released different versions, new recordings, and sequels to songs that were featured on The Glow Part 2. So if you've enjoyed this album, I would highly recommend tracking those down and checking them out for yourself. One of his more recent projects under the Mount Eerie name was an album he released in 2017 titled A Crow Looked at Me, which was an album that centered around the passing of his wife who had died of cancer. The album received widespread acclaim upon its release for its heartbreaking and honest depiction of the events around his wife's passing. The album is admittedly a very hard listen, and Elverum doesn't hold anything back on it, so it isn't the type of album that'll put you in a great mood, but I still think it's a deeply personal and beautiful piece of art that deserves to be listened to and discussed. It's been a few years since his last release, but all of Phil Elverum's music can be found on his independent label's website, P.W. Elverum & Son. He also still performs regularly, and any information about any upcoming live show can be found on his site as well. I highly encourage you all to check it out. For me personally, I really enjoyed this album. I had first heard about it when I had came across I Want Wind to Blow many years ago, and I really liked that track, and I'd always listen to it, but it wasn't until early this year that I decided to give the whole album a try. And it was like one of those things where it's like, where has this been all my life? I really enjoyed it. I listened to it back in January when it was nice and cold, and I think that really added to it. Kind of, really understanding what he's singing about. And also just, I really related to the subject matter, strangely enough. I had my own relationship issues in the past, and hearing similar things that I was thinking at the time being put into music was oddly comforting, and it makes you remember how I felt, but in a good way. It's good to revisit those feelings and think about how they made you feel and how they changed who you are and made you what you are today. I think that's kind of why this album has been so beloved and people keep coming back to it. It's something that's real and raw. There's no hiding. And I really appreciate that. And I hope other people get something similar out of that. The Glow Part 2 is an incredible album that I think greatly deserves the title of masterpiece. Its timeless subject matter and unique presentation make it a truly unforgettable piece of work. If you haven't listened to it already, I highly suggest you grab your best headphones, find a nice, quiet spot, and fully engross yourself in the world that Phil Elverum creates with this album. I'm excited to expose this album to more people and hear what they think, so please leave your impressions of the album down below. With that, I'll bring today's episode to a close. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again in the next album deep dive. Take care. See you soon.